This video will focus on the written text of your UX case study. You will learn about the structure it should follow, you'll learn about the tone and how to write it, what information needs to go in there, what information to leave out, and the importance of using headings and of course proofreading. While there are many ways you can structure and write a case study, it can usually be summarized as the problem, your process, the solution and why that solution matters, and are there any results or learnings out of the project. Here are a few examples of different portfolios so you can see how the text is treated. So this is Gloria Lowe. We can see we have an overview and a role. There's also a link here to the concept video. There's a quote here discussing what the problem is, the background of the issue, understanding the problem. Then she's got some user personas, defining the problem statement, the product vision, defining the minimum viable product. She shows the designs, working with the developers, and the results and the takeaways from the project. Next we have a case study by Sophie Chen. She starts with an overall explanation, role, skills, team and time span. There is a mission statement for the project, the target users, initial research, ideation, information architecture, first prototype, hi-fi prototype, user testing, and the final product, and a video demo. There is an explanation as to what makes the product unique and a reflection on the project. This case study by Moritz Osterloh is a little bit longer. He starts with the client, sector, his role, and the duration of the project, a description of the project, competitive analysis, opportunities and challenges, the methods he used for research, interviews and surveys, the findings from interviews and surveys, building empathy with the users through personas. Then we have the visualizations of the user journey. We have a task model. We have a customer experience map. Then the information architecture, wireframing, prototyping, and the usability testing. Then we go to the visual design. A/B click testing, and a conclusion to the project and learnings. So one strategy for writing your content might be to have a look at relevant UX portfolios online, analyze the sections that those designers have used, and emulate that. The problem in doing so is that you may constrain how you report your project based on someone else's project that has nothing to do with what you did. It's far better to understand what are the underlying parts of a case study so that you can decide which parts are essential and which parts can be overlooked for this particular project where they don't apply. The other benefit to doing it this way is that you can achieve a consistency across your portfolio with different case studies, even if they have slightly different structures because they had a different purpose, different methods and methodology, or perhaps a different end result or end focus, such as if you have a project that is heavy with UX research, but then a project that is more heavy with the user interface design. How can you put two projects in your portfolio and still have them have a consistent look, feel, and reading style? And by understanding what you can put in a portfolio and ensuring that it covers similar ground in similar sections, you can achieve that even if the case studies aren't identical in structure. So we're going to look at what are those fundamental sections and what goes in them. How can you then apply that to different projects? Let's start at the start with the introduction. First, you need a project name, then you need to explain what the project is about. Who was the project for? Was it a side project that you did for yourself? Was it for a university unit, in which case say which unit it was for? I'd leave out the unit code though, that really won't mean much to the person reading it. You can just give the name or description of the unit. Or was it for a client? What were your roles and responsibilities? There's no problem at all in putting teamwork up as long as you are honest and clear about the role you played in it, and ideally you would put up the work that you did individually as part of that team. Be very cautious about putting a team project up and not saying what your role is or claiming that you were doing a lot more than what you did, because chances are they are going to see that same project in other people's portfolio and you might get caught out. Also mention what the timeline is so people understand what the constraints were that you were operating under when you made that project. Next, we get to the problem statement. What problem are you trying to solve? Why is this a problem for the people who are your target audience? What are the constraints and challenges when trying to solve this problem? And what are your goals and objectives? The next part of your case study would be research and discovery, and that would start by identifying your target users and their needs. You would then describe the research methods. Now, don't describe them in agonizing detail. The person reading knows what an interview is and knows what a questionnaire or survey is. The things you need to describe is how you did it. So how many people did you interview? Was there anything unusual about it? For instance, did you interview them on location or while they were using the app that you were researching? If you were using a method that is less well known, of course you can give an incredibly brief description, but remember we're trying to keep this quite short in your online case study. Also, you can report on the results in this section, but bear in mind this is not your overall findings. This is just the results from the interviews, from the questionnaires, from observation or any other method that you've used. And it would only be a very brief main results section. For instance, things that would contribute towards the design of what you were doing, or anything unexpected or surprising, or a huge result you weren't expecting, or something that is key to the overall project that you had assumed and this now confirms it. You can report on that there if you want, but it's not the overall findings. That's later. I'll talk about that in a second. Once you've done your research methods with users, you would then do personas and empathy mapping. Now, do remember that the personas and empathy mapping are based on your data. They're not imagined out of thin air. I think a lot of designers make that error. Personas are there to stand for data, to make it easier for you to design with the data in mind. So please do base those personas on the user research results. Now, in many projects, you might also do competitive analysis and market research, and that would go in this section as well. Again, you would be reporting on your main findings there, not going into agonizing detail. And finally, you would have your key insights, pain points, and research findings. And this is where you combine the data from all the different methods you've used in this section and the main things you come back with. So here you might have done some affinity diagramming to combine data from all different methods, and you're reporting on that. If you have done affinity diagramming with sticky notes, take some nice photos, because UX case studies almost always have a nice photo of sticky notes of affinity diagramming in there. Now you might demonstrate your understanding of the user experience based on the personas you've created and the data you've gathered in your research section. Now here you might put your user journey diagrams and experience mapping. This might be user flows, task analysis. You might also have the current versus the ideal user journey, and you might include a storyboard so that you can present it both visually and in narrative form. Now, if it's appropriate to your project, you might have a section on information architecture and wireframing. So here you would put the sitemap if you have one, or maybe a user flow, app flow, page flow, however you're describing that. You would have low fidelity wireframes in here, plus any relevant and important design iterations that you might have in developing this. Now remember, you don't have to have absolutely everything in your portfolio. It would probably be way too long if you have every single thing I mention here. You need to select what is most relevant to your project, or what is in the requirements for your assessment if you are being assessed on an online case study. Next, in your case study, you may have usability testing and design iterations. Here you would have your usability testing methods. Again, don't describe them in a great deal of detail. We're trying to keep it short. All you would do is tell us the types of usability testing you did, and maybe how you applied it, and anything unusual in its application. You would have the feedback and insights. You would summarize them. You wouldn't give us them in a huge amount of detail. And similarly, the design refinements. Anything that you changed as a result of the usability testing, give us a brief description of that. After that, you go into the user interface design and prototyping. So here you would have what visual design principles were applied, especially if your focus in the case study is the UI design. You would need to put a lot of detail in there. You might have the design system or style guide that you created as a result of this, and describe what were the visual design principles that influenced it. So decisions of typography, colors, layout. Here you would have the high fidelity designs. The number of designs you put in there and describe, again, would depend on the focus of your case study. If you're a UX researcher, you might only have a bit of a description of it. If your focus is to become a UI designer, or that's the project you're working on at the moment, there would be a lot more in there. And also you might put your interactive prototypes into this section. Now, if you are working on a real world project, here you might have a section about handing over to the development team with design systems and components, any collaboration you had with the developers, and also, of course, impact and results after it has been launched. So the metrics and KPIs that you've measured, before and after comparisons, and any outcomes that you can report from the launch of the design. Now, if you're doing this as part of your coursework, of course, that would not be a section in your case study. Instead, you jump straight to the lessons learned, your conclusions, and your final thoughts. So what were the key takeaways from your project? What worked? What didn't work? And what improvements could be made. There you might also talk about a summary of the entire case study, and you might talk about your next steps or future considerations. But the really important thing is that you reflect on the work. If you have a look at a lot of case studies out there in the UX community, there's always a reflection at the end saying what went well, what didn't go so well, and how are you going to improve that for the next project? Because remember that the case study isn't just someone wanting to look at your work. They're wanting to know what you are like to work with. And a reflexive designer who actually thinks about what they do at every stage and reflects on it afterwards and becomes a better designer as a result is usually someone that people want to work with. So that's the video on writing the content for your UX case study. The things I want you to remember are the fact that you are explaining the process, not just what you did. In fact, that should be a very small component of the description. It should mostly be the justification of why you did it, based on the research that you have done. The focus will be different depending on what your project is, if it's for study, what unit it's for, or if it's for a client. It depends on what the focus was for the client and what your role in the project was. A case study for a user interface is going to, by definition, be very different from a UX research case study. But if you look through the key areas that you can put information in for, you can adapt that for the different types of project. And speaking of which, please don't try to put every single thing I listed into your case study. The idea of putting it online in a portfolio is to give you an abridged version that gives you an overview of the whole project and the key elements of that, so that the reader can see where you've done research and where that's influenced the final design. I'm not saying don't record all that information. That can go into a case study, but that might be a much more in-depth PDF case study that you can use in interviews, so that if people ask any questions about a particular project, in some interviews they want you to present that so that you can show how the process went in depth. So that is the context where you would provide a lot more detail, certainly not on your portfolio online. So go through the video, take notes, and then determine which parts need to be put in there for your assessment or for your online portfolio case study. So once you've written the text, for everyone's sake, please proofread it and check the spelling and the grammar. You can run it through a tool like grammarly.com, and if it's allowed in your unit, if this is for assessment, you may be able to run it through an AI tool to make the text better, to make it shorter, to target it at a particular audience, to make it more interesting. Now, that is if it is allowed for your assessment. It is up to you to check that, because it differs from course to course and unit to unit. If it is for your portfolio, then of course, you can make use of these tools and they can make the text a lot better. So to summarize, make sure it is short, make sure it is punchy, make sure it is correct. So if you use an AI tool, check that it hasn't suddenly invented things in your portfolio that don't actually exist. It has done that before when I've tried to use it for certain tasks. And so make sure that you are allowed to use it for whatever context you are creating this case study. The next video will talk about selecting the images for your case study. So make sure you've got that text all ready to go first.